Avatar Roku hated waterbending. In fact, he was terrified by it, but not for the reasons you may think. And the reasons for this are very, very tragic, and something that Roku never forgot until the very end of his life. So hit that subscribe button, and today we're going to go into why Roku hated waterbending and preferred to never bend it at all if he had the choice. So the story begins all the way back in 82 BG, where Roku was born into a wealthy Fire Nation noble clan that made its money in trade. He was not born alone. He had a twin brother named Yasu, who arrived a few minutes before him and who, by a strange coincidence, was also born a few minutes before Prince Sozin. The two of them could not have been more different in temperament. Yasu was loud and confident and the kind of person who walked into a room like he already owned it. Roku was quieter and more self-conscious, more likely to be watching from the edge of things and just observing. Yasu was also, by Roku's own reckoning, the one their parents preferred, and that was not just a childhood insecurity talking. It was a thing that everyone around him seemed to understand without ever saying it. But regardless of all that, Yasu looked out for his brother, and on more than one occasion in their youth, when someone challenged Roku to an Agni Kai, Yasu stepped in and fought it for him. And now we get to the part that makes the end of the story very, very tragic. Before the water meant anything terrible to Roku, it was the place where he was actually the happiest. The two brothers and Prince Sozin used to go swimming together constantly, and the three of them turned it into an ongoing competition that never really ended. They loved the local Fire Nation beaches. They would see who could hold their breath the longest underwater, who could swim the fastest, who could go furthest from the shore, who could dive the deepest and come back up with the biggest oyster, and Yasu and Sozin were both terrible losers about it. Roku was mostly just happy to be included. They had a whole secret life together back then. The brothers used to slip into the hidden passages of the royal palace and make their way down into the dragon bone catacombs with Sozin, where the fire sages kept the scrolls that nobody was supposed to read, the same ones that Zuko eventually found. They pored over descriptions of firebending techniques so rare that they had passed into legend, but they were real. Yasu was convinced the stories were made up, but Sozin was the one who could not stop thinking about them. Later, when the twins turned 10, they left home to board at the Royal Fire Nation Academy for boys, and Sozin was also enrolled alongside them. And that is sadly when the distance between the two twins started to grow. Yasu started spending his free hours with the prince instead of his brother. When Sozin and Yasu sparred, Roku studied on his own. When they played Pai Sho, Roku went to the theater by himself. When the two of them snuck out at night to talk to girls, Roku stayed in bed. He became convinced that his brother and his best friend were just leaving him behind. And this growing rift is why when Yasu came to him one night with an invitation, Roku said yes to something that he probably should have said no to. This leads us to the night of the glowing water. The two were 12 years old. Yasu wanted to sneak out of the academy and go down to the beach to see the bioluminescent algae in the water. And this time, it was just going to be the two of them, because Sozin had been confined to the palace after setting fire to several centuries-old tapestries while teaching himself to bend blue flames. So the two went out just alone. They built a bonfire on the shore to mark where they had come in from, and they swam out. Roku noticed the weather turning. Rain clouds were gathering and the swell was getting higher, and every instinct he had was telling him that this was a bad idea. He did not say anything at first because he had spent 2 years watching his brother choose somebody else. And here he was, Yasu was finally choosing him. Out past the breakwater, the waves were hitting hard enough to knock both of them under before they surfaced again. Roku finally admitted that they have drifted much further from the bonfire than he was comfortable with and suggested to his brother that they turn back. Yasu wanted to reach the sandbar though, which was a bit further out. They went back and forth about it, joked about how bad Roku's sense of direction was, and then Roku said, "I'm serious." Yasu told him that he would come later and then he would send up some flames once he got there so that Roku would know he made it. They traded one last joke, and then they went their separate ways in the dark. A few moments later, a slow building swell came through and hit Roku with a force he described as unbelievable, driving him backwards and under the water. When he broke the surface, he looked for the spot where Yasu had been. There was nobody. For a while, he assumed his brother was messing with him because that was exactly the sort of joke that Yasu would pull. But time kept passing, no flames went up from the sandbar, no voice came back across the water. So Roku, in a panic, started diving. He went down again and again, surfacing, treading water, going back under, searching a black ocean in a rising storm for a boy that he could not see. He lost track of how many times he did it. He lost track of how long he had been out there. Eventually, he lost track of where the bonfire on the beach even was. He only stopped when he understood with total clarity that if he dove one more time, he was going to drown as well. He turned around and swam back to shore as fast as he could, and he was still shouting his brother's name when he got there. Someone found him on the sand, and word went out. A search party was then formed, and his father joined it. His mother pressed her head into Roku's shoulder and wept with tears. They looked all night, and by morning, Yasu was declared lost at sea, gone forever, missing, presumed dead. Tragically, there was no body to cremate, so the family did the only thing that they knew. They gathered a collection of objects that represented Yasu's life, and then they burned those instead, and put the ashes into a traditional Fire Nation urn. His immediate family walked through the capital in mourning white, wearing garlands of sambuguida, followed by the royal family, the fire sages, and most of the Fire Nation nobility. At the clan's plot in the capital cemetery, Roku held his brother's marble urn a while longer before he could let it go. The tomb was then sealed with an engraved marble plate, and the high sage performed the ceremony, finally putting an end to the life of Yasu, Roku's twin brother, and someone he valued absolutely immeasurably. Tragically for Roku, his father blamed him openly and coldly for not saving Yasu. His mother disappeared into her own grief and stopped seeing Roku at all. Roku understood exactly what was being communicated to him, and years later he was still describing it the same way, that his parents wished that he had died in his brother's place. It was never discussed again between them because theirs was not the kind of family that talked about these difficult things. Roku then left the academy for the rest of the term, and Sozin, to his father's irritation, walked out with him. And that leads us to 4 years later. On his 16th birthday, Roku was told that he was the Avatar, and the first thing he felt was that they had picked the wrong twin. He kept wondering whether Yasu would have been better at it. He wondered, seriously, whether Yasu or Sozin was the real Avatar, and the sages had simply made a mistake. And then later on, by the time he reached the Southern Air Temple, his grief was well known enough around the world that Sister Disha, an air nomad monk, deliberately paired him with a young monk named Gyatso, whose own airbending had weakened after he lost his sister, Yama. Neither of them knew about the other's loss until weeks later on the journey to Lombok Island, and finding out was the thing that finally cracked the both of them open and forged them into lifelong friends. In fact, a friendship that went beyond a lifetime. Roku eventually got the three elements, but water was the one that simply would not come for him. Traveling north towards Agnakel, a young healer named Makituk tried to teach him, and he failed over and over in ways that made no sense for someone of his talent. He finally admitted the truth out loud, that he associated water with death. Makituk's answer was to challenge the association directly and make him see water as life instead. His master demonstrated for him, teaching him through building shelter, through moving himself across distance with water, and catching food with his waterbending, similar to what Katara did in the first ever episode of the series. This finally started to soften Roku's heart towards waterbending and made him open up much more towards the element. And then finally the breakthrough came inside of a vision. Trapped in the grip of a massive wolf-headed spirit that had been corrupted by dark energy, Roku realized that force alone was not going to get him out of it. His typical instincts of firebending, force, and power were just not going to work. He had to stop resisting the motion and move with it, and in that moment, he flowed with the movement, he flowed with the energy, and for the first time in his life, Roku was able to bend water. In that very moment, he completely broke the association between death, between his brother, and between waterbending, and finally thought of it as something new. In fact, from that moment on, Roku viewed bending water as a kind of memorial to his brother. His brother was probably still out there in the ocean, and bending that water just brought him just a little bit closer to him than he ever had been before. And that is the tragic reason why Avatar Roku hated waterbending up until he finally was able to use it. Thanks so much for watching. If you love stories like this from the deep Avatar expanded universe, hit that subscribe button and drop in the comments below. Thank Mr. Roku in the comments, and there'll be plenty more coming.